I can only speak for myself, but paying it forward, it makes me feel good, especially this time of year. And that's kind of how I think of supporting Boise State Public Radio podcasts, paying it forward. That's because we don't require any money in order to listen to our podcast. You don't have to pay a fee to hear a locked episode. You don't have to subscribe to a feed in order to hear the podcast. You can listen and share to your heart's content free of charge. But it does cost money to make these things. And if you're able to pay it forward, between now and the end of the year, we would greatly appreciate your support. If you feel so inclined, if you feel so inspired, please go to boisestatepublicradio.org right now and click that blue donate button. Any amount, any frequency, it all helps the bottom line here at Boise State Public Radio. Thanks in advance for your support. And of course, thanks for listening.
From Boise State Public Radio, this is The Connector. It's Idaho's Daily News. Good morning. I'm George Prentice. Today, we've got a preview of Governor Little's State of the State address, and we'll also tell you how some legislators at the Capitol are trying to crunch some numbers, especially when it comes to sales tax revenues, and whether they should be looking at gross numbers or net numbers. We'll explain all that. Plus, it is flu season and norovirus season, and we have some information, some really good advice from the state's epidemiologist in charge, all coming up. It is Monday, the 6th of January, 2025, and here come today's stories. The 2025 edition of the Idaho Legislature gavels into session today. While we can expect a flurry of proposed legislation, lawmakers are truly charged with one absolute task: setting a budget. To that end, a select group of state senators and House representatives make up the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee. Late last week, they heard from an impressive list of economists from the private and public sectors, and ultimately each of those lawmakers are required to come up with a number, the billions that the state will consider to be revenue in fiscal year 2026. But after listening to analyst after analyst offering their own guess at revenue, lawmakers took note that something was missing. Their proposed numbers were not including hundreds of millions of dollars already earmarked for public school facilities or property tax relief. As a result, the number the economists were offering were net numbers. Representative John Vanderwaty of Napa wants the gross.
That we need to look at the total revenue, because it's really hard to explain that the economy's growing and sales tax revenue is going down in our projection. How do you explain that to the general public? If we want to know the real healthy aspect of the state, how healthy it is, we need to include all the revenue. I just don't like hiding income by putting it into a dedicated fund when we're actually going to project the whole state's income, the revenue sources, and we should always be clear.
And fellow members of that committee agreed that their projected revenue numbers should be the gross. And committee chair Senator Kevin Cook of Idaho Falls reminded those legislators that those numbers are due today.
We're still expecting that spreadsheet to be filled out and returned by noon Monday.
So those numbers are due at noon. That's when the legislature reconvenes, and then the State of the State address is set for 1 p.m. James Dawson has a preview of what will likely be Governor Little's most important speech of the year.
Little didn't give away many spoilers ahead of his big speech, but he dropped a few crumbs. He says attempts to unravel Medicaid expansion would be complicated and potentially cost taxpayers even more if counties have to once again pick up the tab for indigent health costs.
What may look like a temporary savings may not be a temporary savings if we have to go back to being on your county taxes.
Little says he thinks the incoming Trump administration will also be more likely to approve Idaho's Medicaid waiver applications, to restrict eligibility, or add new program requirements. He also seemed open to expanding exceptions within the state's strict abortion ban to not solely allow for the procedure if it threatens the life of the mother.
I'm always concerned, as a always pro-life person about basically the reproductive health, long-term health of the mother. And are we addressing that? And I think the Idaho legislature, most of them are interested in that also.
House Speaker Mike Moyle says he wants to wait to modify the law until the U.S. Supreme Court issues an opinion in a case that argues Idaho code violates federal emergency treatment regulations. James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News.
Southwest District Health, including Canyon, Adams, Gem, Oahe, Payette, and Washington counties, has confirmed another flu-related death. It is the 8th flu death in Idaho this season. Meanwhile, norovirus is also widespread in the region. Idaho's state epidemiologist has recommendations on how we can stay safe during these months when the viruses spread the most. Jamie Geary reports.
While the flu affects the respiratory system, norovirus attacks the digestive tract. The virus is highly contagious, spreading most often through contaminated foods and unwashed hands. Norovirus list of unpleasant symptoms include fever, stomach cramps, diarrhea, and vomiting. Dr. Christine Hahn, Idaho's state epidemiologist, says that while norovirus is commonplace year-round, cases increase during the winter holiday season.
There's probably more parties, and we're more indoors more, we're crowded together a little bit more. So it definitely, we see a seasonal pattern to it.
Norovirus cases have been especially widespread throughout the country this past year. The Center for Disease Control says 495 consecutive outbreaks have occurred from August to December 2024, the most in the U.S. since 2012.
We had 18 outbreaks reported in Idaho in 2024, and of those 18 outbreaks, I was only able to see one death reported associated with those outbreaks.
Dr. Hahn says keeping it out of spaces with vulnerable populations like retirement homes is key, and to be vigilant even when you start feeling better.
Be super scrupulous about washing your hands, about not preparing food for others for at least a couple days after you recover. That's our general recommendation.
There is no treatment for norovirus, but serious illness is rare. Jamie Geary, Boise State Public Radio News.
Through the holidays, we reported on the increasing threat of avalanche in our region, and the Mountain Express is reporting that indeed an avalanche trapped a snowmobiler in the Sawtooths in northern Blaine County. Here's the good news. Responders got to the scene pretty quick. Local fire departments, Sun Valley Heliski, and the Blaine County Sheriff's Office. Responders said the victim was in shock but conscious. He was rushed out of the area by snowmobile, then airlifted via helicopter to St. Luke's Wood River Medical Center. And the Sawtooth Avalanche Center reminds us that the chance of avalanche danger is considerable. Now, something much more pleasant. One of the joys of the holiday season is the annual Christmas bird count. Started over a century ago, it now stretches across the Western Hemisphere, usually from mid-December. It wrapped up this past weekend, and in our region, right across the Idaho-Washington border, a participant spotted a rare white red-tailed hawk near Alpoa Creek. The Lewiston Tribune reporting that the expert birder acted pretty quick to snap a couple of photos and then log the bird for the official count. And again, the sighting in our region is being called extremely rare. In sports, this past weekend, they broke ground on what will be a big change to Albertson Stadium. They turned dirt on the long time in the planning change to the stadium's north end. For years, there have been bleachers in the north end. Now they'll begin a permanent wraparound that end of the stadium, ending in 1,600 seats, wider concourses, an open-air sports bar, plus a year-round dining room and nutrition center for student athletes. It's a $65 million project, and if all goes as planned, it should be completed by the summer of 2026. And that is today's episode of The Connector. I'm George Prentice. We'll see you back here on Tuesday. To stay in touch between now and then, check out the Boise State Public Radio website. We are at boisestatepublicradio.org. Better yet, download the free Boise State Public Radio app. And for now, thanks for listening.